What's up, y'all? Welcome back to Fitness Live every Sunday at 12 Eastern. We're early this morning. We're going to publish it at 12, but we're live very early this morning because we're going to the Ravens game today. So we'll be at the stadium. We won't be home at noon today. So, all right, today's topic, top 3 variables when selecting exercises. This is extremely important. Everybody wants to know what the best exercises are and why.
Yeah.
Stay tuned because we're about to dive into it.
Yeah. First off, we're talking top 3 exercises for muscle growth. So not for losing weight, not for building up endurance,
not for running marathons,
not for even necessarily building strength, but top 3 for growing that muscle size. So specifically, we're talking hypertrophy.
Gains.
All right. James, how did you come up with this as a topic?
So I'm doing a video series right now. Hopefully you're watching. A couple have already dropped. The 5 best exercises for each body part. In order to come up with the 5 best exercises, I had to come up with the criteria for the 5 best exercises.
Yeah, I thought that was a really awesome way to do a video series, and I thought that everyone would really benefit for deep diving into his top 3 criteria. Which are your top 3 criteria, by the way?
The top 3, when choose it. Man, you put me on the spot here, and it's early.
I'm so mean.
Number 1. Variable, it puts the most load on the muscle. So the exercise is designed to put the most load on the muscle. The most weight, the most everything on that specific muscle.
Right. And then his other 2 are what exercises create the most trauma, and then which doing compound exercises.
Yeah, obviously compound, that should have been number 1. They're big compound exercises because you can put more load on your muscles with the bigger compound moves.
All right, so let's start going through this. We'll start with which exercise puts the most load on the muscle. So what does that really mean? You know, when you're talking about that, it's really talking about the muscle tension or force output that the muscle has to apply to overcome the resistance that you're putting on it. So that's what we're really talking about when we're talking about exercises that put the most load on the muscle fibers. So now you're probably asking, well, why is that really important? Why do you need to apply the most load to the muscle fibers? So there's lots of different reasons, but the first and foremost is you want to create an adaptation. You want to put so much load on that muscle that your muscles say, whoa, I got to grow stronger to deal with this load that they're expecting me, to lift. And so that's a very mechanical process that the body goes through.
It's the body's adaptation to the load.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to get bigger and stronger to the load you put onto your body. It's a reaction. It's the adaptation to the load. And the bigger the load, the bigger the adaptation.
Yeah, I think Mike Benzer has a really good practical example of this. He talks about exposure to the sun, and how each time you go out to the sun, you're fine. You're not going to necessarily get burnt. But the moment the sun's hotter, maybe you're closer to the sun, you're going to get burnt. And that's the body's adaptation to the exposure and trying to protect itself. So now you're burnt, you come back tanner, so you're darker. So in theory, if you went out in the same conditions, you're not going to get burnt because your body adapted.
Right. And it's the load in that case is the sun.
Right. So similar process. So you want to pick an exercise that is definitely going to cause that adaptation. You don't want something that's really not going to challenge you.
Yes.
As part of that, I would say, intensity definitely plays a part too.
100%.
Yeah.
Are you kidding me? You have to push your weights. Push your weights on the big, heavy compound moves, or you're not going to put the load that's necessary for the adaptation, for the growth.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing I think people don't really think about is over time, if you're not continually applying that load, the body can actually adapt the other way and atrophy.
Atrophy.
Yeah, so that's something to think about too. And, probably people with injuries that are coming back from them that are doing less weight and whatever, they do notice that.
Sure.
First things first, they've lost strength. And then if, they don't get back at it quick enough, and we've talked about this in other videos, they definitely will decrease muscle size,
100%.
which we don't want that. So
we work hard for these gains. Keep them.
Right. So absolutely, you definitely want to put that tension on the muscle, get those gains.
Lift the weights. This goes back to tracking your numbers, making sure you're lifting the weight and adding weight or a rep every time.
Absolutely. All right. Criteria number 2, exercises that create the most amount of damage, or as James says,
trauma. Stress isn't going to do it. Damage isn't going to do it. You got to create trauma to get your gains.
Absolutely. Let me just start by reading you guys the definition of hypertrophy by the National Academy of Sports Medicine. So hypertrophy is defined as the enlargement of skeletal muscle fibers in response to being recruited to develop increased levels of tension as seen in resistance training.
I.e. weight.
Yes. So that all starts there. To create damage to the muscles really just means that those contractile elements in the fibers are actually getting little tears in them because of the weight that you're applying to them.
That's how it works, y'all. The tiny tears in your muscles grow back. They heal together, bigger and stronger. The tiny tears is what you want to create, what you need to create. That's the trauma you need to create to get the gains. And the best exercise you can pick are going to do that a lot faster than.
Absolutely. And the reason that they're getting repaired and you're getting bigger is that adaptation process that we're talking about, because you pick the exercises that put the most load on the muscle. So it's all kind of interconnected with one another.
100%.
So to get that damage, if you will, you need to create metabolic stress and fatigue in the muscle fibers. Damage. So you need to go out and you need to apply stimulus, but you need to apply enough stimulus to create that level of fatigue. And so that means getting enough reps in, selecting the right weights, right? And so I think tracking, as James said, is really important for that.
Yeah, you got to track, man. We just got a comment on my short yesterday about not getting a pump or chasing the pump. And I said, man, I'm going to quote Mike Menster. Everybody in this gym gets a pump every single day. Right. Not everybody's making gains. Your gains are done by adding a weight or adding a rep. Your pump has nothing to do with gains. Feels great, looks great. Don't get me wrong. Love pump. Has nothing to do with gains.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I could sit right here and do 100 shoulder raises to the end of this video, and I'm going to be all pumped up, but that doesn't mean I increase muscle size because I didn't create that damage. Right. I didn't create those little tears in the muscle fibers, which can only really be done by applying enough load. So it's really something to consider there. Absolutely. All right. So how do you do that, right? How do you know how to pick enough load, how to create that damage? Well, for me, the number one way to do that is criteria number 3, big compound exercises, y'all.
Yes, the big ones. We talk about leg day all the time, how it's a different animal. Leg day is a different animal because of the amount of load you can do on leg day. I said it before. You're deadlifting 400 or 500 pounds. You're squatting 400 or 500 pounds. Your leg pressing 1,000 pounds.
Absolutely.
You're going into doing biceps. You're not lifting 400 pounds, y'all. You should lift heavy. You should have to lift a lot, but there's no way you're curling 400 pounds.
Right. Yeah, definitely. So just to level set in case anyone doesn't know what a compound exercise is. It's a multi-joint, multi-muscle group exercise. So a good example would be squats, right? You're using your quads, your hamstrings, your glutes, your calves, and of course your core. Right. So in comparison to an isolation exercise, think of how many different machines you would have to do to hit all that. We'd be doing leg extensions. We'd be doing leg curls. we would be doing some kind of hip hinge thing, like a hip thrust or something, kickbacks for the glutes. We'd be training calves. The list would go on and on. So that's not very efficient from a time perspective, right? So if you're trying to build mass, you want the biggest bang for your buck that gets you there the quickest, and that's going to be those compound exercises.
Absolutely. On top of that, how much weight are your leg extension? How much weight are your leg curling? It's not 400 pounds.
Absolutely.
Like you're doing on your squat.
Yeah, so you can lift more weight, which gets you stronger. So strength does play a part in this, and you have to train your body how to respond to the extra stimulus and build up that strength.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And a rep or a weight. It is strength training.
Absolutely.
100% is strength training. We're not powerlifting, but it is strength training, 100%.
Yeah, you have to train your body to know how to deal with the load. So each time you're adding more weight to those compounds, you're really just training your nervous system on how to respond. And then over time, you lift more. The more you lift, the more stimulus and tension and stress you're placing, the more muscle damage you're going to create, the more gains you're going to get.
I'm going to quote countless people. Stronger muscle is a bigger muscle.
Yeah.
So if you're not strength training, you're just cheating yourself.
Absolutely. All right. So those are our top 3 criteria.
Let's give them those. So we gave you a leg day example.
Yeah.
A good example would be chest day.
Okay.
A big compound movement, which means you're working more than one muscle. Isolation movement's one muscle. Big compound movement would be bench press.
Right.
Load up the weight. You got shoulders, you got triceps, you got chest all working. Huge weight, big compound move, and then compare that to a fly.
Right.
That's an isolation movement. You're isolating your chest. You should be isolating your chest. You're going to get a little forearm, a little bicep, but that's an isolation move. It's completely different. You can go through flies without even losing your breath. Stretch and squeeze, even a good weight. Stretch and squeeze, you're not even going to be huffing and puffing. You do it on a bench press, 300-400 pounds for 10 reps, you're huffing and puffing. You're out of breath. You're fatigued, as you should be. And it created such a big load on that muscle and created that trauma and that damage. Now, with that said, you can't have a workout with just compound moves. These are the best exercises, but you need to put in isolation exercises into your workout. Work your muscles from all the angles, isolation, compound, et cetera, et cetera. Just make sure you're starting with the big compound moves that create the most load on the muscle and the most trauma and the most damage. Yeah,
I mean, even inside of the big compounds, you know, you do have to be selective as well, depending on what areas you're trying to build up. So like talking about the bench press, I would say a flat bench press would apply more load on more muscle fibers than, say, an incline bench press for the chest specifically. So there's other factors to take into consideration too when selecting those exercises.
Right. When you put it on incline, you're recruiting a lot more front delt now than you would as flat. It's more chest.
Right. So if your goal is to build more chest mass, then I would definitely start with the flat bench press over the incline.
Yep. If you have a weak upper chest, start with incline.
Right.
They're both big compound moves. They're both big, heavy lifts, create the trauma and the damage. Just where do you want to work on your chest more?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think most of the time the part that people struggle with is just knowing or getting comfortable with the level of intensity to apply enough load. I think they're really uncomfortable as soon as it starts to get heavy and they're starting to approach that failure zone. They start to pull back over time, and that's really what's stunting their growth.
I've had many clients over the years say to me, I don't lift heavy when I'm not working out with you.
Yeah.
You know, I train them 3 days a week and then they work out on their own 2 days a week.
Yeah.
And they just come back and say, man, we got to go to 5 days a week because I can't do it on my own.
Especially on leg day. That's like the number one body group where they're like, it's not the same.
Yeah.
Don't go as hard.
And as a trainer, that's your job to push them harder than it would yourself. So they should be coming back and saying that to you.
Right.
If they're not, you might want to push them a little harder.
You know, the other criteria too, with the creating the trauma or the damage, I think this one scares people too, especially for a beginner intermediate. I think they have a hard time understanding like what is the proper amount of tension to create fatigue and damage, and then what's too much. And it's a fine line. I think that's a really fine line between overdoing it and underdoing it.
Sure. And you got to get your starting weight.
Right.
That's your beginning week. That's all your beginning week is your starting weight, finding your starting weight. Then week 2, you're adding a rep or you're adding weight. So week 1, really you're just finding your starting weights, where you're starting at. Then you build from there.
I mean, that might even take you a couple weeks.
It might.
I mean, I would just start. In fact, I would probably start with a light to moderate weight and try to do 10 reps. If you're like, man, I could have cranked out 20, obviously that was way too late. And so it does do some trial and error. When I first meet a client, I usually tell them, hey, it's going to take me probably 2 to 3 weeks to figure out exactly where your start place is. And I gauge that by like perceived level of effort, like their fatigue response after the fact, like how sore are they getting?
And beginners get fatigued very quickly.
Yes.
Keep that in mind if you're training somebody.
Right. So it does take some time and trial and error to find that sweet spot. But let me tell you, once you get that, then you can start to do the progressive overload where you're adding weight and adding reps.
That's where the real gains come in.
Right. But just keep in mind, you always want a sufficient rep range for gaining size. Don't underdo it.
Yeah. I got a client right now coming back after surgery, and we're getting right back to starting weights now. So next week, we'll start the gain week. You know, I'm training them today. Today, we're going to do starting weights. Next week, we're going to start cranking it up again.
Yeah. And then in terms of selecting compounds, y'all, I would just make a list of all the compounds and then split them up for however you split up your workouts, and then pick 1 or 2 and put that into your workout. You know, so there's squats, there's deadlifts for legs, there's lunges, chest.
Just remember the principle of specificity. Pick the exercises to work the muscle you want to work. So like Camille said, chest, flat bench, big compound, incline bench, big compound. And then you might want to do an isolation, cable flies, decline bench, barbell, big compound, and then go ahead and finish with flies. That's your workout right there. 3 big compounds, 2 isolations.
Absolutely. All right. So, I mean, I hope that helps everyone breaking it down. So you should be thinking about that in the back of your mind. When you pick the exercise, you're like, does it meet the criteria?
Yes. You can go in there and do different exercises, but it's just going to take you longer.
Right.
You know, this is the most efficient way. The most quickest way to gains is the most load on your muscle. Add a rep, add a weight every single workout.
In fact, I wouldn't go switching out your exercises all the time. I would spend
6 to 8 weeks.
At least 6 to 8 weeks mastering those exercises before you pull them out.
You got to give your body a chance to make the gains. You know, you do it one time, you get sore. You might have made a little bit of gains, but you do it for 6 to 8 weeks, adding that adding that weight every week. Now you're really making gains. Now you're cashing in.
Yeah, and then I think the great part is that James has made it easy for y'all. He's made these video series for all the major muscle groups with the top 5 exercises that meet the criteria that we're talking about.
That's brilliant. You can watch the video, pick a couple off the video, and then throw some isolations in there, and then you got your workout.
Yeah, absolutely.
Brilliant.
Yeah. All right, y'all. Well, anything else to add to that?
Don't think so. Lift big. Get big.
That's right, y'all.
Very true statement. It's been around forever, but lift big to get big.
Absolutely. Well, this channel is here for you guys. So if there's topics and things you want to know more about, definitely drop us a line and we will either film a video or cover it on live. So thanks for tuning in. And as always, make sure you get those